Okay, and everybody has to press continue. Yeah. Okay, well, good evening, good afternoon, good morning, wherever you may be, and welcome to another of our lockdown lectures with Harif. Harif, as you know, is the UK Association of Jews from the Middle East and North Africa, and we aim to explore all different aspects of the history and culture of these Jews. Please do check out our website. It's www.harif.org. And do sign up to our mailing list if you're not already there. Also check our sister website, Point of No Return, which keeps you up to date with the news. This session is being live streamed to the Harif Facebook page, and a recording will be made available. We do have a Harif YouTube channel with over 50 videos on it, so do check that out. We welcome questions and comments. Please do write them in the chat, and hopefully there'll be an opportunity to pose any questions to our speaker after the presentation. So, without further ado, back in February, we heard Carol Castiel tell us about the Moroccan Jews who established themselves in Cape Verde, the islands off the coast of West Africa. But Moroccan Jews traveled much further afield to South America. Why and how did they go there, and what happened to them? Our guide tonight, oh, he's just disappeared for a second. Our guide tonight, and this is looking very, he's really in the mood. Our guide tonight, and this is the first time he's delivering this talk, so we're very privileged, is Dr. Shaul Sadka. He's a journalist, he's a broadcaster and an author. And Dr. Sadka has made a speciality of visiting remote and isolated Jewish communities. And you can't get more remote than the Amazonian rainforest. Shaul gave us a riveting talk on the Jews of Burma back in April, and we are delighted to welcome him back. Over to you, Shaul.
Boa noite. Good evening. Masal khair. Erev tov. I'm talking to you from Hampstead Garden suburb, the most exciting place on earth. Nothing is happening here, almost nothing, which may explain why from time to time I feel the urgent need to go away and as far as possible from this place. As you know, Hampstead Garden suburbs is a Jewish area, predominantly Jewish. Although sometimes I wonder if anybody lives here, because whenever I stroll down the street, I never see anybody. I see Polish plumbers, I see Romanian builders, I see Bulgarian gardeners, I see all kinds of people, but I don't see anybody that resembles a Jew. In any case, given the fact that at least officially it's a Jewish area, I wanted to go to a place where there are no Jews at all. And it is not an easy task, as you can imagine, because I've been to all kinds of places, and even without intention, I stumbled over Jews. For example, I went to Laos just 2 months before I did my trip to the Amazon. And I saw Jews in Laos, a communist Buddhist country. I went then to the Victoria Falls in Africa, on both sides of the Victoria Falls, in Zimbabwe and Zambia. I did not see living Jews, but I saw plenty of remnants of Jews, and so on and so forth. And all the time, in fact, most of the time, I was thinking to myself, you have to find a place where you know for sure that there are no Jews. I was thinking about Afghanistan, because I knew that in Afghanistan there were 2 Jews with 2 synagogues who did not talk to each other for many, many years. And as far as I know, both of them passed away. So with some issues with the Taliban, I decided not to go. But then, as I was sitting here in my library, contemplating my next destination, being depressed by the weather, I was thinking about a different, more exciting destination. And I did not really know what this could be. And suddenly there was a bang in the letterbox. The postman delivered a parcel. I rushed to the door, and what do I see? A parcel from Amazon. And that's how I decided Amazon is going to be my next destination. There was another mission. Whenever I go, I always see Iraqis around the corner. I've seen Iraqis, Iraqi Jews or Baghdadis, as you may call them, in Indonesia. I see them in Hong Kong. I saw them in Singapore, even in Malaysia. In Japan, in Tokyo, Osaka, and Kobe. Well, Kobe reminded them of Cuba. That's why they settled there. So this time I said, I have a mission. Maybe if I do go to the Amazon after all, and I see Jews, it may be quite curious to find out if any of them are Baghdadis. As it happened, I was not so sure if I would find Jews at all. So let's kick off with the presentation.
Okay. So Shaul is starting his journey in Hampstead Garden Suburb, and we're off to the Amazon rainforest.
Yeah, I just want to show you where all it happened, really. Yeah, this is my main door. Here you have my mail bag. I was pulling out the parcel, and that's what I saw. And mind you, while I'm at it, I would recommend you to install this kind of sack behind your mailbox, because you don't have to kneel down to the floor and pick up your letters, especially at your age. So, although you may say you would do it under different circumstances, if you found maybe a few pound notes on the streets of Hampstead Garden Suburb, something that never happens anyway. So, okay. I'm here with you here to present my adventure in the Amazon, looking for the amazing Amazonian Jews. Share screen?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
We're off.
Are you with me?
Yes, I think from slideshow. Yeah, excellent.
So you can see me.
Yeah, we can see all your slides though.
Oh, I have to eliminate it. Just a minute. Okay, how about that?
Perfect.
Okay, this is it. My first and last port of call was Manaus. Manaus is the second largest city in the Amazon on the Brazilian side. And it has about 1.8 million people living in this city. This is the seafront of Manaus. Here you can see one of the favelas that Manaus and other cities in Brazil, mostly Rio de Janeiro, are so famous for. Can you see Jews living in such a place? I wonder. But whenever I was thinking about going to Manaus, one thing sprang to my mind, that I have to go and see the most famous landmark of this city, which is the Opera House. The Opera House is a reflection of the huge wealth that the Amazon had because of the rubber trade. The rubber boom throughout the 19th century and the beginning of the 20th century made people so wealthy. And by the initiative of local people, many of them were in the rubber trade, as well as the coffee and other agricultural products. They built this amazing opera house with ingredients, with components that came from 4 different countries in Europe. And this is me. I want to show you that I did not pick up all these slides from the internet. And this is the interior of this opera house. And it looks exactly either like the Covent Garden Opera House or the Scala in Milan or the one in Paris. It is amazing. You don't feel that you are in this sweating spot in the middle of the jungle. And of course, I don't have to remind you that the famous movie Fitzcarraldo was about the Manaus Opera House. And here you see the opera house from...
Turn music off. You can hear more music than you.
Yeah.
Sorry?
You can hear more music than you. That's great.
Yeah.
I see. Okay, because I think the music is more interesting. Okay, and this is just the center square of Manaus, where the opera house is located. Needless to say, my next port of call would be, of course, to take a boat on the river, Rio Negro, and all the way into the jungle. And this is how it started. I hired a private boat, thinking mistakenly that Harif will pay for it.
Sorry to disappoint.
And on into one of the closest parts of the Amazon jungle, which needs to be spent in about 4 hours until you feel the rich dimension of this rainforest. And of course, one of the wonders of the world, if not one of the 10 wonders of the world, certainly maybe the 11th one, was the meeting of 2 rivers. One is black, Rio Negro, and the other one is red, and they never mix. They never mix. They stream side by side, and each one of them preserves its own color.
Amazing.
The reason is that each river has its own temperature and its own speed of streaming. And that's why they would never mix with one another. And that was only the beginning of my voyage into the rainforest. And that's me again, just to show you that I was there preparing myself for looking for lost Jews. And well, I did not find any Baghdadi girls here in this location, although some of them could be. 1 or 2 would be definitely ideal candidates for conversion, even by the strict rabbinical Orthodox Bet Din of Israel. Here you have a few more. Can you imagine that these people may have been the descendants of Jews who immigrated to the Amazon in the 19th century? I doubt it, but they were quite well behaved and cooperative. And this is what they are doing in order to sell their products. Of course, this is only the first stage of staying in this particular amazing place. The next thing I did was swimming with Pink Dolphin, but I leave that to a different presentation for obvious reasons. And here you have more of them. They don't speak a lot of Portuguese. They have their own dialect. And they were quite happy to take pictures with me. In order to go very deep into the jungle, I needed to take vaccinations and also a guide with me and spend 3 nights inside the jungle, something that I could not have done, needless to say. And this is the woman who was supposed to be
the one who greeted me. I was giving a fair welcome by everybody who was living there. They look like people who are entertaining tourists, but they are quite genuine. And this is the one I would definitely adopt or bring back from the jungle to be integrated in the Jewish community, wherever this may be. And there is another one, this one as well. I think she also came across as a local beauty who could also be mistaken as a Jew. This is the kind of women that present themselves quite proudly as people who are adhering to their heritage. Many of them talk to me in whatever languages against the current President Bolsonaro, who they look as an enemy, who wanted to commercialize the rainforest and push them out. And when I say Bolsonaro, I mean only the Brazilian part of the Amazon, because there are many parts as well. And as I think I mentioned in the invite to the presentation, there was also, still is, a small Jewish community on the Peruvian side of the Amazon. Well, you don't see here Cuba or Mhasha or Hashwa or even Sambusak. They offered me the fish, but I politely declined. And this is on the way back. And in the middle of, in the center of Manaus, you can see something which looked obviously as a synagogue. They did not let me in because I looked suspicious to them. And the caretaker was the only one during the week who was inside the synagogue. But this is the synagogue in which kosher Jews and non-kosher Jews pray. And there is, of course, as we saw already in other parts of the world, a distinction between Jews who have a Jewish mother and they are kosher, genuine, and those who don't have a Jewish mother, and therefore the Orthodox rabbinical element in Brazil would not regard them necessarily as Jews. Here is a map that has been given to me locally that shows the distances between the two main centers of Judaism in the Amazonas. Belém in the north is where the biggest Jewish community lives. There are about 1,000 people. Belém was also the first gate to the Amazon and to Manaus, as it happened when the first Jews came over to this country. So Manaus, Belém, 2-hour flight. If you take a boat, it will take about 5 days. Manaus to Sao Paulo will be a 4-hour drive. I came by plane from Rio de Janeiro and it took me about 3.5 hours. So if I wanted to know more about Jews, I needed to go and speak to the Chabad representative. And I saw them in action. I saw them in Laos, I saw them in Kiev, I saw them in so many parts of the world where they are in fact trying to keep the Jewish flame alive, even though there are no Jews at all around them. And this is how I came across Bet Chabad in Manaus. It's not exactly Bet Chabad, it's a villa in which the Chabad representative and his family live. And I contacted him and he invited me for dinner. This is Rabbi Arya Reichmann. Nothing to do with the Reichmann brothers who built the London Docklands in the 80s. He was born in Houston, Texas, and he married Devorah Leah, who was born in Belém, where her family still live. And they have 6 children. Here they are, only 3 of them. They live in Manaus for the last 12.5 years. It's not easy. because they don't get many visitors, and they are holding a minyan at their own home. One of the room is located as a synagogue. And Rabbi Arya even invited me for dinner. But look, this is the bima where the scroll would be placed during the Shabbat services. And they are quite well established, although their minions are very, very limited due to the fact that the number of Jews in Manaus is scarce. So how many kosher Jews are in Manaus? About 265. How many non-koshers? 600. Still a community after all. And as it always happened to me, I don't know why, somehow, suddenly, I found myself laying at a tefillin, which reminded me that only a few weeks earlier, I did the same in a different location that you would not necessarily guess. Look at me here. What is that? It's me, definitely. And yes, I do lay tefillin. You would not guess where it is unless you see the next slide. On the way to Wimbledon tennis championship, Chabad guy set up a hamburger stall, and whoever laid the tefillin, got a free hamburger. Ask me, did I pay for it? I would tell you, no, I did not pay for it because I laid the tefillin, but then I thought, gosh, people will get the impression that I laid the tefillin just because of a free hamburger. And that's exactly what happened to me with Rabbi Arya. He's telling me that his father-in-law is flying every month from Belen with kosher meat. And he offered me chicken that night. Would I snatch chickens from the mouth of his children, knowing how rare the commodity is in Manaus? Of course not. I would never do that, and I declined politely. Later on, I had to cross the street and have a non-kosher chicken. But I still hail his generosity because, as you could imagine, there are no kosher facilities in Manaus. However, Rabbi Arya, who was ordained in Jerusalem, is also a mohel. So whoever is looking for exciting place to circumcise his son or his grandson, Rabbi Arya would be ready. And then he told me that the rabbi who ordained him was none other the chief rabbi at the time. His name is Mordechai Eliyahu, who happened to be my cousin. And when I told Rabbi Arya about it, oh gosh, he really liked the pedigree. He could hardly believe it. I told him, listen, he was my cousin, and I'm not so sure I liked him so much because he was quite fanatic. But then he was quite an admirer of him. And he showed me the document which stated the fact that my cousin ordained him in Jerusalem a couple of years back. Mordechai Eliyahu. By the way, talking about this cousin of mine, he was caught in the 60s trying to smuggle a bomb into the Knesset in order to blow up a meeting in which the parliamentarians were about to discuss the obligation of Israeli girls to join the Israeli army. And he, of course, opposed it, being a member of a fanatical organization called the Underground of the Fanatics. Eventually, he spent only 11 months in prison, but he became a chief rabbi. So it was worth it. So bye-bye Wimbledon, don't deviate me because I have to concentrate on the Amazon. So I saw a few Jews coming over to Rabbi Arya. I exchanged pleasantries with them. Some of them spoke Hebrew. Some of them had a faint knowledge of Moroccan, but most of them were born in and around Manaus for the last 150 years. But in order to find Jews, as it always happened, I have to go, you know where. And this is the Jewish cemetery in downtown Manaus. You may recall, at least those who remember me from my previous presentation about the Jews of Burma, that I visited the Jewish cemetery in Burma where about 6,500 Jews are buried. And this is where I found my relatives, Ben Zion and Reuben Sadka. They died in 1929 and 1932. And eventually I managed to establish the level of the relationship to me. And I thought, wow, could it happen that I'm going among those tombstones and find lost relatives who immigrated from Babylon to the Amazon in the 19th century? No, such a miracle did not happen. All the names on these graves were Moroccan. Ben Shimol, of course, Cohen, definitely Levi, Azulai, Ohayon, and most of them were already born in the Amazon, but some of them came from Tetuan, from Marrakesh, from Rabat, from Casablanca. Nobody came from Fez or Matnes, but I know that they were escaping poverty in Morocco, and they came over all the way by boat to the Amazon. They started in Belém, and they ended up, because of the rubber industry, in Manaus. And the guy who took me the following day to see the Jewish section of this vast cemetery was Rabbi Arya, who showed me around. And it was amazing to see that it is just right in the heart of this buzzing city. And this is where from time to time, Rabbi Arya goes to visit the grave, although there is, of course, a caretaker who does it on a regular basis. And as you could see, here is a child called Shimon Asayag, who passed away on Shabbat. And this is a relatively a new grave of the child who passed away. And here you see another one called Rika. And sometimes, and they're of course bilingual in Portuguese as well as in Hebrew. And as I was going through the graveyard, I wanted to show you in this slide that the Jewish cemetery is on the left and the Catholic cemetery is on the right. What happened was that the Jewish cemetery has been opened only in 1944, after the Jewish community in Manaus bought a plot of land from John the Baptist Catholic cemetery that you can see on the right. And look what is happening here. Holy Moses. I can find something which is quite amazing, even unique. This is the grave of Rabbi Shalom Emmanuel Muyal, who died in Manaus in the year 1910. But the most amazing fact about the location of this grave is that he is buried in the Catholic section, not in the Jewish one. The immediate reason, of course, is that Rabbi Shalom died before there was a Jewish cemetery in Manaus. However, the grave could have been moved, but it wasn't. And very soon you will find out why. And the reason why it was not moved to the Jewish section was not because the Jews did not want to do it. It's because the Catholics refused to say farewell to Rabbi Shalom Muyal. They wanted him in their own graveyard. I think this picture will explain to you why. As you could see, many people come over and leave stones on the headstones. But when you see what is happening on the left wall of this grave, you will find Catholic names of people who are expressing their gratitude to the rabbi and thanking him for helping them in their life, even though he is dead for more than 100 years. So why that is happening? This is something which I found very, very interesting. It so happened that when the rabbi died in 1910, 111 years ago, he died of yellow fever. And there was only one person who was willing to come anywhere near him. And this was a Jewish woman called Cora Israel. And she nursed him during the last weeks of his life. And suddenly, after he passed away, Cora started to perform miracles. I don't know exactly what she did, because at that time, I don't think that Brazil won the World Cup in football, but she was performing miracles for individuals. And whenever she was asked, where do you get this power from? She said, from Rabbeinu, from the Rabbi, Rabbi Shalom Muyal. And that's why the Jews refuse, the Catholics refuse to let this grave move, because it's still visited by many people who swear that he performed miracles that changed their life. But then there was, when they found a crack in the headstone, it has been quickly repaired by the Catholics, and the Jews took advantage of what happened in order to build a fence around it. That's how they created a sort of a situation in which he was buried in a Catholic graveyard, but he was surrounded by a fence that may make it not necessarily part of the Catholic territory. But the next surprise, do we have time for commercials, Lynn? No. The next surprise was what comes next. Next to the rabbi's grave, I stumbled upon a few very indescript other graves, like that one, or that one in the middle, or that one, I saw that before. And all of them had inscriptions of women, Jewish women, in Yiddish as well as in Portuguese. For example, this is the grave of Rosa Goldberg. Why would this woman be buried in a Catholic graveyard? And who are they? They are not Moroccans. So the story is much more intriguing than anybody can think. That's another one. And you can see the Hebrew letters are of Yiddish. These are the ladies: Camilla Bloom, Rosa Fisher, Rosa Goldberg, Rosita Goldman, Berta Wasserman, Anna Faye Donan, and Rachel Reich. They all passed away between 1908 and 1920. You may say they were buried in the Catholic cemetery because there was no Jewish cemetery at the time. But then they were not moved. They were not moved from 1944 onwards after the Jewish community acquired a plot for their own graves. And the reason is more harrowing than you think. Because Camila, Rosa, the other Rosa, Rosita, Berta, Anna, and Raquel were all prostitutes. And they were prostitutes because of tragic circumstances that brought them over all the way from Poland or Ukraine or Romania or Russia, all the way to Brazil in the 19th century. And this is the reason why they came to Brazil. And we are not talking, of course, about 7 ladies. We are talking about a Jewish super pimp called Zvi Migdal, or Louis Zvi Migdal, that between 1860 and 1939 set up an organization of pimps. They lured Jewish girls from the shtetl in East Europe all the way to South America. He had 1,000 people working for him. And we are not talking about a handful of people. Those 7 ladies in Manaus are not actually recorded or documented in any book or leaflet or an article that I saw, because most of the Jewish prostitutes were based mostly in Buenos Aires and also in Brazil. But the reason why we are talking about this organization was because the society that bear the name Zvi Migdal were headed by criminals who managed to charm the parents of these girls who were suffering poverty and pogroms in Eastern Europe. They would go to the synagogues and present themselves as rich people who own factories in Argentina, or agricultural farms, or jewelry shops. They will come to the shul in their best clothes. They would leave notes on the synagogue notice board asking for a shidduch, for a matchmaking. They will approach the father in the synagogue and they will tell him, listen, I would like to marry your daughter. And how would they know about who is the father of which daughter? Simply because they were collaborating with the matchmakers who advertised them on Yiddish newspapers all the time. And this is how gradually Zvi Migdal built up an empire of 30,000 prostitutes. And I know that the numbers sound imaginative. The headquarters was in Buenos Aires, but he had branches in Brazil, USA, Poland, Johannesburg, Shanghai, Bombay, Turkey, and even more. 4,000 women, 430 pimps, 200 brothers were based in Argentina only. And the biggest city in Brazil where they were operating all the time was in Rio de Janeiro. 431 brothers. So how this could have happened? When it comes to Argentina, prostitution was legal at the time. But more than that, some of their clients were police officers, city officials, politicians, and judges. And that's why they could have torture, abuse, and harm those kind of girls. Some of them would be as young as 13 or 14 or 15 years old. Let's talk about maybe one specific case. Her name was Sophia Chamise. Sophia Chamise was born in a small shtetl outside Lodz. And she was approached by somebody called David Borowski. He saw her outside a delicatessen shop, and he told her, "Oh, look, I can invite you for a meal." She has never been to a restaurant before. And then he bought her dresses and shoes and even some kind of cosmetics. And he asked her to take him to her father. And her father was adamant that she is too young, 13 years old only, to go with a man she does not know. So he told him, "Listen, I have a mother who lives in Lodge and she needs a housekeeper, somebody to help her." So only then the father agreed. And indeed, he took her to his mother in Lodge. She did some housework. These girls did not have the money to go to school. They did not have the money to go to a cheder. They were completely illiterate. And that's why it was so easy to exploit them by all these gangs of pimps, who all of them, unfortunately, were Ashkenazi Jews. So 7 of them ended up in the Amazon, and that's why they are buried where they are. This is just one old picture that I managed to find, showing Jewish prostitutes in Rio de Janeiro. And at the beginning, the organization of Zvi Migdal was called Warszawa or Warsaw, named after the Polish capital. And this angered the Polish ambassador in Brazil, who complained to the government, and eventually the government asked Zvi Migdal to change the name of this organization. So it was called the Association, Zvi Migdal Association of Mutual Aid, Burial, and Synagogues. When these girls were brought to Buenos Aires by boat, they were paraded naked in front of customers and pimps on the first day of their arrival. And most of these parades took place, ironically enough, in a hotel called Palestina. Palestina, not because of the Arab connection, but because of the Zionist connection. These pimps were proud of their Jewishness. They made a point of going to the synagogue. They donated money to Jewish institutions. They were flaunting their richness when they attended the Yiddish theater in Buenos Aires, sitting in balconies in suits, accompanied by beautiful girls. And all this was happening under the watchful eyes of the authorities. Mind you, in Argentina, the prostitution business contributed 25% of the national income, because most of these brothels were regulated and the pimps paid tax to the government. And there was no way that anybody will take them to court if most of them were clients of them. So this is something that was happening over many decades. That's another illustration, an oil painting of such a brothel in Buenos Aires. And eventually, as you could see here from this clipping, 108 of them out of about 424 were brought to justice. And this happened already well into the 20th century, in the 20s. And the woman who managed to do that to them was one single heroine called Raquel Liberman. She was a prostitute. She managed to buy her freedom from her pimp. She got married again, only to find out that her new husband is also a pimp, but a year later he died of cancer. And she found in Buenos Aires the only honest police officer. And this police officer knew the only honest judge in the city. And that's why eventually so many of their pimps were brought to justice, but one of their employees. And this is Raquel Liberman. There is, of course, a memorial plaque in her memory, sitting in the place where she is buried. Now, what happened to all these women? Many of them died already in their during the 20s. Many of them did not even reach the age of 35. Sophia Chamise, the one I mentioned before, she died at the age of 18. And there were many reasons for her to die, including, of course, sexually transmitted diseases. But the prostitutes in Brazil set up an association to look after their own interest. And they bought a plot of land in which they established their own mutual aid organization. And not only that, they even set up a synagogue which was for the sole use of these prostitutes, a synagogue that even had a scroll. And I should tell you that at one point, the mainstream Jewish community in Brazil, as well as in Argentina, but mostly in Argentina, could not tolerate the activities of the pimps. They did not want their money anymore, and there was a clash between them, although the authorities, as I said before, turned a blind eye. At one point, there was a Jewish activist who blocked the entrance to the Yiddish theater with his own body and told them not to enter. Many other Jews joined him, and they kicked out those kind of pimps. And you know what they did? They set up their own synagogue. And upstairs, above the synagogue, there was a brothel. This was in Buenos Aires. What happened after the police cracked down on them following the conviction of all these people? They ran away to Brazil. And in Brazil, they were not greeted with open arms because there was a cooperation and coordination between the Brazilian and the Argentinian governments. And many of them were sent back to Europe to die in the Holocaust. So this is the story that I can only tell in different circumstances while going to the Amazon. I did not expect this to happen. I did not expect to find Jewish prostitutes in a Catholic cemetery in the Amazon. I did not expect to know so much more about the empire of these pimps. And of course, if somebody wants to ask me after the presentation, if there was anti-Semitism, of course there was. In 1930, there was a coup, a military coup in Brazil, as it always happened. And the dictator, his name was Cortés, accused the Jews of corrupting the children of Brazil, of the high inflation, of the high rate of unemployment, of the decline in the coffee prices, and he started pushing them out of the country. And this was actually the beginning of the end of the pimping industry in this country. So as I go back to what I showed you, I can say that, yes, there were two sides to the story, of course. On one hand, the Moroccans came over to this country, Brazil, in the 18th century. Why? Because they experienced harsh living conditions. If we are talking about those innocent girls from the shtetl in Eastern Europe, the Moroccan Jews had their own shtetls, the Melach, where they were finding desperately opportunities to make a decent living, and they could not. And this is something which I would like to tell you against the background of this family of Rabbi Arya, because this family stayed at home. The children don't go to school. They do homeschooling. Armies of private tutors are coming over to teach them. 6 children. They speak 5 languages. One of them is Yiddish. The other one is definitely Hebrew, not to speak about English and Portuguese. Don't ask me about the 5th language. But this is in the middle of all that, a family that preserve Jewishness to the core. And they pay a penalty to the Brazilian government because homeschooling is illegal. But the government is willing to accept this kind of penalty every year, so they will be able to continue and preserve this kind of teaching on a daily basis. Mind you, Chabad representatives are having a hard time because now they don't have any visits at all. Most of the Israeli backpackers go to the other side of the Amazon because it is quite expensive to reach Manaus. Some of them come to the Amazon through Peru, where you may see also a small Jewish community, which I did not visit, of course, and this is in a town called Iquitos, where you would be able to find some Jews, remnants of a much larger community. Most of them are so-called unkosher Jews. Some of them used to be Catholics. And here they are preserving Shabbat in a mattress shop. Many of them, after being converted by an American rabbi who came over, made Aliyah to Israel. And they settled mostly in Ramle. Ramle is a mixed town, Israeli mixed town, Jews and Arabs. I hope nobody would attack last May during the riots. Otherwise, they would come back to the Amazon. So yes, they are the so-called Jews of Iquitos, a very isolated town with no road to it. Many of them left for Lima. Some of them used to be Catholic. Some of them made it back to being Jews again. Jews became more fashionable to be in Brazil in the last 2 decades. Many of them have rediscovered their Jewishness. While we are talking about the Moroccan Jews who created new trade routes into the jungle, all the way down from Belém to Manaus during the boom years of the rubber industry, we have to talk also about different kind of Jews who came much earlier to Brazil, and they were escaping the Inquisition in Portugal. And eventually, as it happened in the 17th century, many of them were still hidden Jews. And there are documents in which the Inquisition authorities of Portugal sent people to Brazil in order to discover them. That's why many of them, long before the Moroccan immigration, were hiding in Brazil because they were so much afraid of what had happened. And as if to add more to the drama, I would also mention the fact that at one point, the Nazis set a store in Brazil. Many of the chief Nazi criminals came over to Brazil and to Argentina, mostly to Buenos Aires, where Adolf Reichmann was kidnapped by Mossad agents. And they were living side by side with the Jews. Buenos Aires, of course, is a more exciting story because at one point during the first decade of the 20th century, 500,000 people lived in Argentina, most of them in Buenos Aires. But so much as it's embarrassing to say that, the first immigrants to Argentina were Jews who were pimps, and then came over as part of the white trade that brought so many white Jewish girls into Brazil and other parts of South America. So this is the story so far. what I can tell you is that I wanted to make it more entertaining, and it so happened that I ended it in a very sober note. Rabbi Arya would like to say that since my visit to the graveyard, the Jews lost 4 members to COVID-19. My visit was, of course, BC, 19 BC, before COVID. But we have to say that Manaus was affected a great deal by the COVID pandemic. Only in Manaus, 13,000 people died. And that's why I took the trouble to show you a different kind of cemetery, far from the city center, at the outskirts of Manaus, where people were buried day after day, night after night, during the peak of the pandemic. So the Jewish community is short of 4 people. I don't know how many of them died of the other section, but what I know is that this is the story in a nutshell. So it became quite somber. I can only say, thank you for braving the weather and come to see me. Thank you for leaving the comfort of your armchair and sofas. Thank you for grappling with parking issues. Thank you for paying congestion charge. I appreciate it all. And although I cannot expect you to enjoy such a presentation, I can tell you that it was a traumatic trip for me. It started very well, but it ended very, very sad. This is the story of not only Moroccans or Maranos who made it to Brazil and Argentina. It is a story of Ashkenazi Jewish girls who were forced to be part of the prostitution industry in Brazil as well as in Argentina. I'm open to questions.
Well, thank you very much indeed, Shaul, up to your usual entertaining and informative standard. Ashtidak, somebody says. Are there any questions?
Got nothing in the Q&A at all.
How did the Moroccan Jews end up in the Amazon? Ralph,
We already answered that.
you haven't been listening. It's the rubber dude.
Well, it was the lure of the rubber, and it is quite, I would say, sardonic to say that we are talking about 2 different kind of people, one from Morocco and one from Eastern Europe. And there was no connection between them. Despite the fact, by the way, I have to say that the proximity of the rabbi's grave to the graves of the prostitutes is coincidental. Don't draw any conclusion. Okay. However, as I mentioned, the rabbi, was he a rabbi at all? I was trying to trace his whereabouts. He came to the Amazon in 1908. In 1908, yes. 10 years before my mother was born. My Baghdadi mother, she's still, she's 102 years old. She's in, mother, are you listening to? But he arrived at Belém. He took a boat all the way down to Manaus with the aim of serving the community. But what exactly did he do? Within 2 years, he contracted the yellow fever. But then I found out that he left behind a pregnant wife. So why would he come to Brazil? Well, you may say, well, he had a Moroccan wife, a good reason to run away. But this was not the reason. The reason is still ambiguous. It's a mystery, because she did not know about what happened to him. And I understand also she did not even know about his whereabouts. I'll go back to my bibliothèque. It's more joyous.
You're frozen.
Yeah.
About what exactly motivated Rabbi Shalom Muyal to make all the way from Brazil, from Morocco to Brazil. Now, in 1980, listen to that. A member of
Shaul, I think you better go back by the garden. We can't hear you.
No, you keep
can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Sorry?
You keep freezing.
Okay, so I'll go back then.
Yeah. Okay, but we got a good view of your t-shirt again.
Thank you. Okay. In fact, I wanted to wear a pajama as a homage to my Baghdadi father, because I remember myself thinking about the fact that in Israel, they were always looking for a derogatory name for Iraqis, and they could not find any because they were so educated and linguistic. So they found out that in the evening, the Iraqi Jews or the Baghdadis were sitting in the balcony with their pajama. That was the big joke about the Iraqis. So I remember my father sitting around the dinner table in his pajama and eating khichdi with amba.
Mm-hmm.
And a couple of years ago, as I was having the same kind of dinner with my family, I found out that I'm doing the same. I'm sitting here in Hampstead Garden Suburb of all places, in my pajama, eating amba, and this is it, you see? Don't you think that I'm trying to mislead you, yes?
That's
I thought if
that's the commercial.
sit here, that's the commercial. If I sit here in pajama, it would be a homage to my father, because at that time we were all embarrassing by that, yes? And we always tell him, oh, the amber is stinking. Can you put it on the floor? Yeah. The other commercial that I wanted to do is to show you a new product that the Jewish Yemenites brought to Israel, and it's called schuk.
Yes, we had that last time, Shaul. We had that.
Yeah, exactly. But this time I can show it to you. Who sells it? Waitrose. So khichdi, sambusa. My mother is 102 because she was eating so much sambusak in her life. This is the secret to long life. Anyway, so what happened with Rabbi Muyal? His wife was waiting for him years and years. And eventually she remarried after she understood that he passed away, and she had 3 more children. I'm sure she immigrated to Israel in the 50s. So, what was the question?
We've got more questions from the audience. Holly, then Raquel, then Shap.
Yeah.
Okay, let me.
Shaul, I don't know what happened, but it's a bit dark where you are.
But now I'm done.
Now you're in shadow. No, that's better.
Okay.
That's better.
Yeah,
Perfect.
Holly, do you want to fire your question?
Yes, hi, Lawrence. Hi, Lynn. Good to see you again. I'm sorry I don't have my picture. I need to get a haircut. Saul, you were delightful. We want to have you back again. We want you to do Iceland. Saul, I want to ask you, I embrace the Amazon. I've never been to Israel. My town is, I'm going to pronounce it wrong, Acre, A-C-R-E. Do you know how far Acre is from Mineros?
No, but I can find out.
The reason why, and I embrace Acre, I'm going to give you a laugh.
Where were you born?
What?
Where were you born?
Oh, I was born in Chicago, Illinois. I'm from the United States.
Are you in Chicago now?
Yeah, well, I'm in Wisconsin, which is a neighboring state, but yes, I'm in the Chicago area.
Okay, so what can you pronounce the name again?
A-C-R-E. That's how it's spelled.
Okay.
You know.
I will find out.
Okay, and then also,
yeah.
And I wanted to say to you, Saul, I embrace Acre. I'm pronouncing it wrong. It's at 2 rivers. So this is my joke to you. When it floods, I get double flooding.
Yeah. Oh, talking about commercial break, this is cachaça. Cachaça, yeah.
My son Alon bought it for me when he was in Brazil a year ago. He was so intoxicated by my stories that he wanted to be there as well, but he did not go to the Amazon. And
We're
by the way,
intoxicated.
and
We're
by the way,
intoxicated by your stories. We want to hear more.
okay,
1360 kilometers, about 800 miles.
Yeah.
Oh,
Oh, good,
800
thank you.
miles?
800 miles.
yeah.
800 miles.
800
yeah.
miles
You can
from,
do the trip, Holly, no
Yeah,
problem
it's,
at all, after COVID.
no, how far
It's
is how far is
unapproachable.
how far is Mineros from Acre?
1360 kilometers, which is
Oh, so, it is
846
800 miles. Oh, it is that far. Oh,
Yeah.
okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
I recommend a visit to the Amazon, not necessarily to Amazon, but
We have
this is-
Rick. Yeah,
this
we
is-
have Rick on the call who actually has a page on Jews of the Amazon. Isn't that
Oh.
right, Rick?
We have Rick and then Shep.
Rick, would you like to
Yes.
say a word or two?
Rick enlightened us.
Rick Gold, please.
Yeah, can't hear you.
Okay, Shep, are you there? Shep, do you want to come up with your question?
Yeah, I'm here. Yeah. Hi, Rick. Good to see
Hi,
you.
Jeff.
Hi, Lynn.
Yes.
Hi.
So, Ricky, the only thing I wanted to ask you, Sol, when
Yeah,
you were
sure.
when you were investigating these Moroccan Jews who came to the Amazon, did you happen to come upon anybody with my family name? I mean, it's a very Moroccan name, but
What is your Moroccan name?
Wahnoun, Wahnoun.
Wahnoun. I did
Yeah.
not see any
The
Wahnoun.
Wahnouns of Tetuan.
Tetuan, yeah. Many Jews from Tetuan came to the Amazon, yeah, following the rubber trade. Ask me, by the way, I forgot to mention one of the most important details, that most of the Moroccans who arrived in the Amazon married local wives. Yes, and you know, imagine me. I mean, I sometimes, in retrospect, I envy them. Yeah, can you imagine? I'm sure that some cynical people will say, "Oh, Moroccans. Oh, pity not all of them went to the Amazon." Or maybe the Moroccans themselves will say, "Oh, if we went to the Amazon, we would not be second-class citizen in Israel." Anyway, this is just a joke on the side. What I'm saying is that only a few hundreds Moroccan Jews went it, but most of them did not, all of them did not, none of them went back to Morocco. Most of them passed away in the Amazon. Some of them had children from local women, and they became the creme de la creme of Brazilian societies. Lawyers, doctors, engineers, politicians, academics, what have you. At the same time, I can say the same in a very sharp jump to the other subject, that many of the children of those Ashkenazi prostitutes, yes, became prominent people in Brazil and Argentina, but nobody know about their past, of course. It's funny because I wrote here on the side something that may intrigue you if somebody knows Portuguese, because the name in Portuguese for a pimp is kaftao. Kaftao, named after the kaftan that Jewish Orthodox people used to wear at the time in Brazil. And many Yiddish names from this particular subject entered the Portuguese dictionary. This is only one of them.
Okay, now we've got Rick and then Samish. Rick first.
Rick, I think you're unmuted now.
Is it me or Rick?
Oh gosh.
Rick, can you speak?
He's muted again.
I'll unmute. Do you want to go first, Samish, and I'll
Okay,
unmute Rick again?
first Samish and then Rick.
Okay, my question to you is regarding the conversion. There is a documentary that was screened somewhere about the Moroccan and the Amazon, and there were a lot of controversy about whether they are truly Jews, that they have to go through some sort of a conversion. The reason is because most of the Moroccan that went to the Amazon were men, and they married a non-Jewish women. Therefore, what is the status of them in Israel, and what is the status of them in Brazil, if you know the answer? Thank you.
Hey, thank you, Samish. I can give you an answer. First of all, it's quite obvious that all the Moroccans who went to the Amazon for the rubber trade were men. Actually, when I spoke to you before about the other subject in Argentina, most of them were men. The proportion in Argentina at the time between men and women was 1 to 10. That's why there was such, because so many of them were immigrants and they came without any family. So that's why there was such a demand for girls to come over from Eastern Europe. Now in Brazil, all the initial Moroccans who came over from, say, the third decade of the 19th century onwards, until the demise of the rubber industry, after the Malaysian and the Indonesian markets proved to be much more competitive. All these Moroccans who initially came to the Amazon were 100% Jews, even in the eyes of the Orthodox rabbinical establishment. The trouble started when the children were born to non-Jewish mothers. However, a small section of those Moroccans were followed by Jewish women from Morocco who came over to marry some of their people who did not know. However, some of them were cousins, but we are talking about a minority. Most of the Moroccan Jews who came over to the Amazon married local women. And they, of course, in the eyes of the Orthodox, were not Jews. And that's why there is a split, because the establishment of the Jewish community in São Paulo would be very cautious when it comes to recognizing this kind of people as Jews. In Israel, the situation is even worse, because as you know, under the current clerical regime, they would not accept them as Jews automatically. Not so long ago, they decided not to recognize Ugandan Jews, I've been there also, BC, as Jews, because they did not adhere to all the rules and the laws of Judaism. However, those people that I showed you at the end of my presentation from Peru, from Iquitos, they managed to be recognized not necessarily by the Orthodox political parties, but at least by the Jewish agency, who recognize them as eligible Jews who are entitled to make Aliyah to Israel. And in fact, about 600 of them managed to make Aliyah, although some of them were Catholics before their conversion.
I think Rick has been very patient and he keeps on muting himself. So Rick, far away, and then Judith.
Thank you so much. So wonderful presentation. I had a question about the types of shuls or synagogues that were set up in Brazil, in the Amazon. I understand that in Belém and in Manaus, there were competing shuls that represented different factions within Moroccan society. The descendants of the Sephardim and the descendants of the indigenous Moroccans, or the Berber or Amazigh Moroccans. Did you anything about that?
This is your frozen. Yeah, Rick, you were frozen for a minute, but yes, you are right. There was a kind of distinction between various Moroccans. Some of them came from the Shloch. They were used to be called Shloch. They came from the equivalent of the shtetl in Morocco, villages. Some of them were Berberic. Some of them were not exactly 100% Jews in the eyes of the Orthodoxy, yes, but they were practicing Jews, and they were the pillars of the Jewish community in the Amazon. By the way, the new synagogue, the new building that I showed you at the beginning of my presentation, has a weekly minyan on Saturday and also on Friday night. And 75% of the worshippers are of Moroccan background. And the nusach, the style of the prayer, is Moroccan. Only 25% are of different denominations who came from different backgrounds. So the Moroccanism in the Amazon is still alive and kicking because people are keeping up the tradition, despite the fact that they are not in many ways very well off, certainly not as the descendants used to be, ancestors used to be. So this is the situation now. We are talking only about a handful of people, of course. The bulk of the Brazilian Jews live in Rio and Sao Paulo. We are talking about 175,000 of them, but 10,000 of them, 10% of them are regarded as Marranos, as people who were escaping Inquisition in the Iberic Peninsula.
So Rick, I have a question for you. How did you get interested in the Jews of Amazon, and why do you have a page about them?
I've lived in Morocco for 4 years, and I oversaw food aid for the Moroccan Jewish community through the American Jewish Joint Distribution Committee. And that was about 20 years ago. And I put together a website on for tourists who want to visit Morocco and understand it from a Jewish perspective. And I updated it because it's been 20 years or so. And I realized that, you know, with 2,500 Jews in Morocco, there's like 1.2 million around the world. And it's important that tourists understand the life and perspective of Jews who live in Israel, France, Canada, the US, and Latin America. So that's why I ended up with a page on Moroccan Jews in Latin America.
Okay, well, thank you very much. And the link is on the chat if anyone's interested. Thank you.
Judith, sorry you had to wait a long time. Sorry about that.
No problem, thank you. In '92, I came across in Brussels with Professor Anita Novinsky from Brazil, who was studying the history of the Marranos and was going to the Amazonas in order to identify some of them. Do you know if she has worked about the Moroccan Jews in the Amazonas?
I have no idea.
Okay.
You know,
very interesting woman. She was really going to the jungle there and trying to identify sites where Jews were being slaughtered.
What I know is that if somebody wants to know more about, I'm sorry that I take you back to the prostitution industry, because this cemetery in which 671 prostitutes are buried in Rio de Janeiro, this cemetery still exists. It is just a pity that the city municipal authorities had to demolish the synagogue because they were making way for the new subway system. But the graves are still there, and almost nobody visits them, of course. What is important is that they managed to organize themselves, and the current prostitutes in Brazil are actually emulating what happened to the Jewish ladies from Eastern Europe, and they also got themselves organized. The last one who passed away was Rebecca Feldman, and this was in 1984, and she was a living testimony to what was happening. But this particular cemetery became a hotbed for drug traffickers. It's dilapidated, it's neglected, and the women who are buried there were immortalized in a book that has been written by a Rio de Janeiro-based journalist called Isabel Vincent. And she wrote a book that could be obtained even today. It's called Bodies and Souls, in which she concentrated on 3 of them. And one of them was this Rebecca Feldman, whom she did not manage to interview because she refused to talk about the past. And then in 1984, she passed away. She was living in the neighborhood of Flamengo in Rio de Janeiro. And what happened was that when this synagogue was demolished, the Jewish community who had such a disdain of the girls were queuing up to get all the furnitures and the candlesticks and the bima that was part of that synagogue. And this is exactly what I'm talking about, the fact that for many, many Jews, it was a source of a shame, and they refused to recognize the fact that this kind of women are Jewish at all. But it so happened that eventually, after so many decades of anguish and suffering, these women are being recognized in books. It also been, they were also mentioned by Shalom Aleichem, the Yiddish author who was in Argentina, Stefan Zweig, and even Bashvis Zinger, who wrote a story called Scam, in which he mentioned the pimps. And he said that when those people went to lure the girls in the synagogues of the shtetls in Poland, they were telling them, in America, you can eat an orange every day. This was a way to lure them all the way to the new world.
Okay, I don't know if we've got any more questions. I think we've still got 56 people here after an hour and a half. So I think that's a testament to how interesting.
I've got one last question for Shaul. Your top is ready for the beach. Is your bottom the same?
What was the, I did not
Your
get
top is dressed for the beach. What are you wearing underneath? Are you ready for the swim?
Yeah. Are you wearing your Panama